Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to explore a range of different solutions to climate change and specifically discuss how you would evaluate these solutions. And I'm going to base these around the Chad Frischman ideas, and you'll have watched a TED talk already earlier on when you were thinking about how we can manage the problem of climate change. I'm going to use his top 20 list. Now, evaluating a solution or evaluating anything involves you making a series of judgments that normally are a mixture of agreeing and disagreeing, or advantages and disadvantages of a particular thing that you're considering. So in this case, we're considering does something solve a problem, and how impactful would it be and how possible would it be. So let's deal with the first one at the top of the list. The thing that has been identified would make the single biggest impact on reducing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay, and it's to do with refrigeration. So if we were evaluating the use of F-gases, and so first thing you'd want to do is actually describe what the solution is before evaluating it. And I suggest what you do is, as I go through each point, you might want to pause this tutorial and then use it to construct your answer. So I would probably start by saying, one of the solutions to climate change could involve changing the gases used in refrigeration units or in air conditioning units away from the more harmful gases, the F gases, to other gases or other materials, that's up here, that actually cause less damage to the planet. And you might then want to say, if we were to do this, this would have the biggest impact on climate change because F gases are significant contributors to global warming, are the most significant contributors to global warming at the moment, and reducing them is seen by many to have the biggest effect. Now that would be a positive evaluation. You're giving a reason for why it would be really good to do it. Well, let's consider why that might be problematic. So what could we write as a negative evaluation? Well, first of all, the world currently has hundreds of millions of refrigeration units. So the first problem we're going to have to do is remove the existing refrigeration units that have these very damaging gases in them. And we have to do it in a way that ensures that the planet's not going to be harmed. So it's one thing moving forward to make sure that all gases in fridges are good and safe gases, and that's certainly achievable, and under international law that's actually now what we have to do. But the problem is looking at how many fridges and air conditioning units have been built over the last 30-40 years that have the really bad gases in them. So it sounds like a great solution, but we've got a problem that's been stored up over a long period of time, which we need to think of a way of doing it in a way that's not going to damage the planet. So for example, in the UK, if you've got a fridge, you can't just take your fridge down to the dump and just throw it away. It's got to be properly taken from you, and if it does go down to the local dump, it's then got to be managed by a proper company that will extract the gases from the back of it in the tubes that are at the back of your fridge, and do it in a way that ensures those gases don't get emitted into the atmosphere. And that brings me to the second kind of negative evaluation, that to do this, to actually remove all of these very dangerous F gases from air coolant systems, is going to cost an awful lot of money. And no one's willing to pay that. Certainly the consumer's probably not willing to pay that. Okay, so that's us kind of evaluated our first issue. Let's look at the second biggest issue, wind turbines. So let's think about on the positive. Why would we want to move towards a world of wind turbines? And as a matter of fact, if you look down this list, you can see other energy solutions being proposed all the way down this list. And I'll come to nuclear later on, because that's probably a separate one. But solar farms, rooftop solar and geothermal, these are all renewable energy sources that do not emit any CO2 in the generation of energy, and therefore do not contribute to climate change in terms of carbon emissions. And therefore that's what we want to be doing. And that's a really positive point to make. On a negative side, and if you're thinking about evaluating renewable energies. The most obvious one is that, so for example, these two solutions are not necessarily solutions for areas of the world like Scotland, where the amount of sunlight we get is a lot less. Equally, areas that aren't windy, wind turbines aren't a valid solution. So great for Scotland, but areas that get less wind, probably not a decent enough solution. Because the problem with these weather-dependent renewables is that they are weather dependent, and when you don't have that weather, you need a backup plan, and actually that's where nuclear comes in. But there's one negative evaluation. Another negative evaluation is it involves, and this is the common problem with wind turbines, it involves building things that a lot of people are opposed to. So you might remember from National 5 we introduced this idea of NIMBYism, or not in my backyard, and there's huge numbers of groups of people opposed to the building of wind farms and actually of solar farms because they feel they disturb the landscape. So there's going to be quite a lot of conflict that is generated between local groups as we move into a world with more renewables. There is a third evaluation you can make about renewable energy, and that is that the actual building of solar panels and the building of wind turbines involves a factory-driven process somewhere in the world, and often that might be, for example, in China. And those factories might be powered using electricity that has been created through the burning of coal. Also, the materials that go into making the products might involve fossil fuels being used to actually create those materials. And then finally, these wind turbines or these solar panels then need transported across the world, often using ships, to where they're then going to be built onto the landscape. And that also involves the burning of fossil fuels. So whilst they don't create fossil fuels in the generation of energy, the actual production and transport of these renewable sources of energy does involve the burning of fossil fuels. So there's quite a lot of kind of negative evaluation. I don't think, by the way, that diminishes the fact that we need to think more about renewables. We definitely do. But they're not as perfect as you might think they are. Now let's just come to nuclear, because if you're evaluating nuclear, as a solution, it's great because it generates huge amounts of energy. And that's why a lot of people are very for nuclear power. And you can put it in an isolated location, and you can power a massive city on the back of one nuclear power station. It also doesn't generate fossil fuels in the production of that energy. Therefore, it's relatively clean. And I mean clean with inverted commas, because nuclear energy does unfortunately generate nuclear waste. And that's where the significant problem lies with nuclear. And it's that the nuclear waste is potentially very harmful and radioactive and can damage human health as well as other species on our planet. The other problem is that it remains radioactive for a long period of time. We're talking hundreds, if not thousands of years. So it's not just harmful in the short term, it's potentially harmful for generations way in the future that have had nothing to do with its production. So seeing nuclear as the only solution is not realistic. Okay. Final evaluation, and I'd like to talk a little bit about these two because I think this is a really fascinating area that's worth evaluating. So a lot of our solutions that have been proposed today come around changing human behaviour and changing the number of people on the planet. And it's most of the household decisions are taken by women. And therefore, if we want to move to a world that is more vegan-based, if we want to move to a world that involves less transport, if we want to move to a world that is less consumer-driven, and therefore we're manufacturing less products that lead to the carbon emissions, we need to think about the fact that a lot of those decisions are going to come from the mothers of the world, and they're going to be passed down to their children. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. And therefore, the education of girls is seen as a potential trigger to changing human behaviour because they are seen as the main educators within the family unit. Linked to that idea, educating girls is going to ultimately lead to better family planning decisions. So anywhere in the world where we've seen increases in female literacy, we have seen reduction in family sizes, in fertility rates. And obviously, if you think about the link between the rise of the human population and population growth in the last 50 years, that has been strongly connected to the growth in carbon emissions. So if we can start to have less humans on our planet, we can reduce family sizes, we can reduce the number of humans, we're going to reduce the amount of need that humans place on our planet, we're going to reduce the amount of food we need to grow for people, we're going to reduce the amount of people moving around our planet, which is contributing to the problem. So these two ideas are connected and would have a significant effect potentially on both changing human behavior in terms of what we do to live and how we live, which could affect climate change, but also will reduce the sizes of families and reduce population pressures. So it would work very much in the positive. On the negative, because remember, we are evaluating, the amount of investment required in educating women around the world is very, very high. It also cuts across many cultural barriers towards achieving this. I mean, sometimes it's just economics that means women don't get educated in some parts of the world, but sometimes religion and culture actually plays a powerful force in this. And when you start promoting the education of women, which I'm sure all of us in Scotland would agree with, for every part of the world, you will find in other cultures that they are less willing to take on those ideas, even if it has planetary benefits. So we are challenging the way we live, and I'm not sure how many people are willing to necessarily change the way they live. And not just people elsewhere. Here's another evaluative comment you can make about this. Would you be willing to give up your holiday abroad? Would you be willing to give up your iPad? Would you be willing to give up your hamburger? All of which are things that can potentially result in global warming, because all of them are potential causes. But are we willing to change? So I'm not entirely convinced. And it's the same kind of argument you have for plant-rich diets and getting people to eat less meat, because we all know that meat eating is part of the problem, because cows, for example, produce huge amounts of methane. But also, if we look down here at afforestation, cows result in the cutting down of huge amounts of forestry so they can graze, and we need to forest up our planet. So what I've done is I've reviewed some of the key kind of factors down this list. There are others. What you need to make sure you do when you write the answer to this question, so I'm just going to break this down for you, is you need to describe the problem. That's the first step. And you just need a sentence for that. Keep it simple, because you are just evaluating, and your marks are going to be achieved for evaluating. And then the second step to that is give me a positive comment about what's good about this solution. Why would it work? What would it do? But more than likely, give me 1 or 2 or even 3 negatives. The more critical points, evaluative comments you make, you get a mark for each one. Okay? So this tutorial reviews how to evaluate, or has reviewed how to evaluate a solution, and looked at the pros and cons, picking it mainly from this list of the top 20 things that we can do to help deal with climate change.